This is very much part of creating a global movement for localization, a global movement that would allow us to respect the diversity of the living planet, allow us to create genuinely sustainable and just ways of living. But it's wonderful for us to be able to gather like this. We did this morning, as some of you may know, with representatives from India, from Japan, Vietnam, Nepal, and Philippines. And what was, I think, really helpful for people was seeing how similar the problems are and how similar the solutions are. How there's a pattern there that the human scale, community-based, bottom-up initiatives are demonstrating that it's possible for us to solve multiple problems simultaneously if we dare to think that going smaller and slower is actually progress. So that's a central theme. And this morning, just as today, we always have a central focus on food and farming. And very happy to see it, particularly Nelson and Salim, and of course, Saad and Chris. So we've got here almost half of us are engaged in agriculture in one way or another. Our engagement is to do everything we can to support small-scale farmers and local food systems. So I'd first like to introduce Henry, for those of you who don't know him, and particularly those of you who've just joined us. Henry's been working with Local Futures now for almost 10 years in one way or another, including working in Ladakh and learning to speak the language remarkably well. And very happy to have Henry here helping. He's going to be a strict timekeeper. And we're going to need to whiz through fairly quickly, unfortunately. We believe that this global connection, this ability to share more deeply and to not only share information and, as it were, the narrative, but also look at how we can collaborate across the world is vitally important today. Some people think that's contradictory to, or in some ways paradoxical, if we are promoting localization. Not at all. We are promoting a path whereby people around the world would have the right to wean themselves of dependence on global corporations to become more self-reliant, and in so doing, become more responsible. And in part, because they would then also become aware of their impact on the land, their impact on other people. And people confuse this economic localization with a sort of political withdrawal where we're just suddenly going to look inward and look after ourselves. Well, almost nowhere on the planet is that possible anymore, because virtually everything that lives is being affected by global corporations and global banks. So this withdrawal is a withdrawal from dependence on these giant institutions that are not inhabited by evil people, but as economic juggernauts that have been given freedom to roam the world without any regulations, and that generally don't pay tax. We're talking about monopolies that have a very destructive impact. One of the main ones is that they cannot respect diversity. So they are part of building a human monoculture, consumer monoculture, and they are part of the buildup of industrial forms of production, energy-intensive industrial forms of production, where in agriculture, it's led to these vast monocultures that are inefficient, destructive, bad for our health, destructive of ecosystem. So a turning away from that towards smaller scale, more localized, more diversified economies makes a lot of sense. And I hope that we will see today more clearly than ever how around the world we have similar challenges and similar solutions. But we want to hear from you and to hear a little bit about what you've been doing in your area and the challenges that you face. And I'd love to start with Chris, if you're happy with that.
Sure, thanks. Yeah, so my name is Chris Smaje, based in Britain, in the UK, Somerset in the southwest. I'm basically a small-scale farmer and grower and writer. I wrote a book a couple of years back called Small Farm Future, which sort of goes through, endorses a lot of the issues that Helena was just talking about. So yeah, kind of interest in food, farming, and connections with climate, energy, and sort of political and economic futures. So yeah, I tend to be a bit of a recluse here in my farmhouse and my study. So it's nice, great to be here, connecting with some other people. I mean, I guess I've been involved in thinking, writing, and trying to do this sort of thing for 20 odd years. And you know, there has been progress. I think things are better in various ways. I think, you know, there's all sorts of initiatives at the local level around food and kind of connecting local growers and farmers with local eaters, a sort of emphasis on protecting and enhancing local business. A lot of people, I think, have got more interested in gardening and sort of, you know, breaking down that distinction between professional, commercial farmers and growers and amateur. And, you know, a lot of farmers are kind of stepping off the global commodity crop treadmill and trying to stack enterprises and engage more directly with their local communities. There's organizations that have started in Britain, like the Land Workers Alliance, which is affiliated with the international peasant organization La Via Campesina, and that's been doing all sorts of good work, sort of lobbying and supporting small-scale farmers. So, you know, there has been progress, possibly also in the sort of public political narrative. Brexit obviously has been a big thing here, and then the pandemic and climate change and a lot of activism, sort of the whole protest movement around climate change, I think, has drawn attention to food. So the idea of not necessarily food sovereignty, which is perhaps what we should be talking about, but food security, and the idea that, you know, there are big issues around food are perhaps a little bit more in the public domain here than they were 20 odd years ago when I first just kind of started working in this area. But you know, I think there's also all the usual obstacles and you know, the kind of political inertia around all this. There's I guess two big books that came out in the last year or two about the food system. Henry Dimbleby's book Ravenous was kind of a little bit it's sort of not massively focused around localism. And then George Monbiot's book Regenesis, which was very much a kind of critique of the whole idea of local food. If you'll forgive me doing a little plug, I've got my own book called Saying No to a Farm-Free Future, which is being published next week, in which I kind of lay out again the case for agrarian localism and critique Monbiot's position in his book, which you know, I think is quite problematic. And you know, the debate is still rather stuck around things like, oh, you know, it's lower impact to import tomatoes from Spain than it is to grow them here in the UK. And, you know, you can sort of unpack that argument in so many ways. You know, I think the level of challenge we have around local economies, climate, energy, water, labor issues and so on, goes so much deeper than that kind of narrative. And it's kind of disappointing to me that the debate is still couched in those terms. Obviously inequality is another huge issue in the UK, and access to housing. So there's kind of beginning to be a narrative around that, but not really so much about access to land. Well, that's not entirely true. That is the case, and certainly in Scotland, perhaps is sort of a bit ahead of us here in England. But okay, thanks. I'll wrap up. I mean, I guess what is great about talking with an international group is I think all of us in one way or another face issues about access of ordinary people to land and access of ordinary people to the ability to produce food locally for themselves. And I think, that hasn't become, it's not a mainstream political issue in the UK right now, but I think it will do as some of these chickens of the larger economic system come home to roost. So I think, that's going to be the big political battle to come. How do we get access to land in our local communities? And I think everyone faces that internationally. So it'll be interesting perhaps to hear from other people and how that issue manifests, in different local places. So great to be part of this conversation. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Chris. And your work is vitally important. And you're a very lone voice in Britain, but hopefully in a place like Zimbabwe, and with Nelson here as an organic smallholder and as part of the Via Campesina, I think it'd be wonderful if you could follow, and I'm so happy you'll be able to join us in Britain and to wake people up to the hundreds of millions of farmers that we're talking about. We're not just talking about 1% here.
Thank you so much, Elena, and thank you so much, Chris, for a wonderful presentation. And from myself, I would love to start from a tree that is growing on the soil with its roots under the soil, and the roots not flying on a plane with a visa and passport, but just collecting food from the soil where it is located and feeding the trunk and the leaves, producing some food that goes back again to feed the tree, and fruits that goes out and which can spread the seed to other areas and multiplying that tree species. And coming back again, I would like to bring our attention to the chameleon, to the way it is born, where it is not very fast, but it adapts itself to the local condition, and it takes the color of where it is, and because it is very slow, and this is what is natural, what God has created, and it is what makes all things now to think from a local position, because already there are living things that are born locally and which are not moving anyway, but enjoying the food of that local situation. And they have never been even taught about technology, and even thought about the GMOs, or thought about whatever sorts of other different kind of foods are concerned, but they believe in the food that was created for them to eat, and which they believe it is going to be contributing to their health being, and even to their welfare, and even to the little bones. So I will reason from that level. As a smallholder farmer, born in Zimbabwe, grew up in Zimbabwe, learning from all the practices of my family and rooted into my cultural experiences, where we had some experiences where we could not eat any other food outside ourselves, but food that is grown from our own community, food that is born, food that we believe our parents have been eating, and food that is connected to our environments, and food that can grow to our own local climates, because climate change, this is not the beginning time or the beginning of changes in the climate, though it is more severe right now, but there were lots of different years that experiences the changes in as far as climate is concerned. But the fundamentals, what are we talking about here? We are talking about the waters that comes right across onto my piece of land and how I have to take care of the water and create relationship with that water. We are talking about here the soil where I am going to sleep by end of my life. I will sleep under that soil. So there should be that connection with myself to that soil. And we are talking about here the seed that is growing out of it, the seed with blood, the seed without blood. And for my own understanding, the seed without blood is much powerful than the seed with blood, because the seed without blood can survive for many years than the seed with blood. Once the seed with blood is dried, nothing more you can talk about. So the rest of us is like that, but with seed from the food that we eat to keep the blood seed is what is very important, and which is where the struggle is, and which is what is we protecting as smallholder farmers in Zimbabwe.
4 minutes, Nelson.
Yes, we need to keep that seed, and we need to make sure that seed is surviving and that seed is giving us enough food. We need all total diversity, but with all these other resources that being kept by us, and making sure that we have the nutrition, the diversity, we have the connections, we have all the resilience in as far as the food that we want to eat is concerned. So localization is quite powerful in our context, because it brings back what belongs to us and make sure that we are fed in a very harmonious way, ecological way, and nutritious way, which brings what we call food sovereignty. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Nelson. I'm wondering, Thais, if you could talk about your EcoUniversity and to maybe also to what extent you're including agriculture as a focus, because you are based in the city and focusing mainly on ecological education.
Perfect. Thank you, Helena. Okay, so we work basically with education towards regeneration and ecological processes. This year we have worked with biomimicry for education. We have now just worked with decolonization as a topic as well with our students. And our next course is going to be around indigenous wisdom. So it's all around how can we localize regeneration in Brazil, right? Because we talk about regeneration everywhere, and I think regeneration and sustainability and localization means something different in every local aspect, right? It means something different from its territory perspective, from the peoples there, from the history of the country. Brazil is a colonized country, it's full of different nationalities inhabiting this land. So how do we connect to each other, understand this history, and make something different out of it? So I think as being a systemic activism, right? A big picture activist, you need to educate yourself about what's going on. So this is the front that we are in. Last year, we worked with agroforestry. Agroforestry is very big in Brazil, especially due to CO2 carbon credits. Yeah, so here we lots of small farmers and big farmers are changing towards regenerable food systems to sell the credits. But this has lots of problems going on, especially in indigenous lands, and lots of problems with the new government as well. Even though it's a better government than Bolsonaro, there are still lots of problems going on in the agricultural ministry and the ministry for the environment. But we have now more space to talk about those things. So what I wanted to share with you is a few projects that are our partners. I have a few pictures, so I don't know if I'm able to share these pictures, because last time I didn't show pictures, and today I think it's more about their story. I'm just an enabler of these wonderful people who are close to us and working locally. And we are just like a platform for them to tell their stories and connect to other people and help other people see it's possible to live in a different way. Because Brazil is such big in localization, it has so many local projects, it has so many grassroots initiatives, but we're not collaborating, we're not working together. They're very isolated. So this is my like goal for this year and next year, to create this network between them so we can be strong together. So this is a project called Instituto Favela da Paz. It's in a favela in a shanty town in Brazil. And it's made by the people in the favela, and they started growing food within the community for the community. And it's all organic, and they work together to get donations for sustainable solar panels. So they invent their own mechanisms of water storage. So the power of community and localization, like working within your community, in your territory, and making the best possible sustainable way of living there, is been super successful for them. And they're a very cool and important partner for us. Let me see if I can change. This is an agricultural example. So it's called the community that supports the agriculture. It's all over Brazil. So you can see the map of Brazil, and all these dots is a community. So you can be in every city in Brazil, and you will have a community of people that came together to support small farmers. So our people that live in the city, that they want organic local food, together with a farmer, they create a community, a cooperative. You pay a fixed amount per month, and you get your veggie box in your house. And you always pay the same amount, and you don't know what vegetables come. So it's very connected to the farmers, to who actually buys. And then you have local events that connect the farmers to the people. So I think it's a beautiful example of what's happening all around the world, and having organic food at a decent price as well. Okay, I'm ending. This one is a fashion one. It's in the north of Brazil. So it's women coming together for social inclusion within the fashion world, organic as well. They go all the way from planting cotton to making the design of the clothes. This is the same thing. So like artisan women in the north of Brazil creating dresses and handbags. And the last one, it's also in the favela. It's called Favela Orgânica. It's in Rio de Janeiro, and they are growing organic food in the favela and cooking very high quality food together, and showing that it's possible to have local projects that can be like a global example of how can we live within this land regenerative and respectively. So thank you, and sorry if I ran over a bit.
Thank you so much. I'm just so proud of how much you've done as a young woman, pulling these things together. And this is one of the things that emerged this morning too, is how people are seeing that there are so many projects around, but they're not linked. And it's that even within their own country, even within their own region, they often don't know that there's so much going on. And this is the task of trying to identify that all of these small actually constitute something very powerful and very big, if we can try to help connect them, at least just through information, just knowing that it's there. And I guess in many ways, Juan, that's what you're doing, isn't it? And we're going to be seeing your film there on Alter Nativas. You've been involved with the Transition Town Network, as J. Tompt has too. And you're very much about pulling together these alternatives, aren't you? Do you want to say a bit about that?
Yeah, thank you, Elena, and hi to everyone. Indeed, when I was listening to Thais, that I'm sure probably, I don't know, Monica Picabea or people in Sao Paulo that are working on these topics. I was thinking about this, that all these projects are universal and are happening all over the world, adapting to its own place, but are happening everywhere. And myself personally, I've been working for the past 15 years as a network weaver, as a catalyzer within the transition movement, but beyond, also at European level. I'm part of EcoUniversidade, that is a meta network trying to build, to connect permaculture, ecovillages, transition. And one of the key challenges, as it was expressed before, is always about connecting these movements, strengthening them, creating more critical mass, and building together a shared narrative of possibility, showing that everything that is happening all over the world is part of something bigger, that we are not alone, we are not doing things isolated in our place. Because some of the challenges that we face right now is that the narratives, the imaginaries that they arrive to us, as we all know, are imaginaries of either there's no possibility of doing anything because there's a complete collapse, and then what should we do? Maybe it's better just to get frozen, you know, and you just do anything, or science and technology are going to be the saviors, and we'll continue growing forever. So between those two imaginaries, we need to build these new stories, no? And that's part of my work, building these networks. And the last project I'm engaged with is this film, this documentary that we will be able to watch tomorrow as part of World Localization Day, is the international premiere, in which we showcase community local examples on different topics and different areas, or in this case around Spain. So we cover a lot of different projects in food, in education, in rural areas, but also in urban areas. We talk about economy, local currencies, about so many different things. And when you see, I mean, it was very hard to choose the projects, but it could have been others. You know, it's not. There are many of them, and you see that they face similar challenges, but at the same time they have similar needs and similar strengths. For example, we are at local level. We are relearning how to do things together, collaboratively, and more. If for everyone that has been involved in social movements, for example, we see how we are maturing in the way we do things together. We are also learning about how can we find and share resources in a more collaborative way. And we are also, fortunately, starting to be able to break a little bit the barriers between different movements. It's not about the brand, for example, and now we are converging to something bigger. This is something I'm observing not only in Spain, but in different places. For example, in Spain, things that are very strong at the moment are ecofeminism, are degrowth, are social and solidarity economy, eco-social transition. All these type of movements are step by step coming together. And this is also connecting, for example, with Extinction Rebellion, that, for example, I have some friends right now that they were part of what we call the Scientist Rebellion, because we are connecting with scientists that are bringing the real truth to everyone of the current situation. As you know, well, climate change is affecting everyone, but the Mediterranean, it will become probably a desert very soon. And I just see here, for example, the colleague from Palestine that I've been working there in the past years too. And
that's 4 minutes, Juan.
Yeah, thank you, Henry. So maybe just to summarize, because I think that's also what the essence of my work and the film. I will share with you also the link for the screening tomorrow in the chat. Is this sentence, this African proverb that was used quite a lot by Eduardo Galeano from Uruguay. If you don't know him, I really recommend you to read about him. There is a lot of small people doing small things in small places can change the world. And I think it reflects a lot what we want to do with this World Localization Day and with this movement. So yeah, inspired by you, and let's continue.
Thank you so much. And you were talking about Palestine. So Saad, can you tell us about your very inspiring work? We've met before in Portugal, and your story of how you managed to create this agroecological little model and paradise in a climate of, very different worldview and pressures. We'd love to hear more how it's grown. And I know that you're also involved in eco-villages, something that I've also been involved with for many years.
Yeah, thank you, Helena. Yes, my name is Saad Dagher and I am from Palestine. I'm a farmer and agronomist. Actually, I studied, I keep saying that I studied chemical farming. It's known everywhere that we study at university, chemical farming. And in the beginning, I started to work as an extension worker. I went to farmers, I visited them, gave them some instructions in the beginning about how to improve their crops using improved seeds, chemical fertilizers, and so on. But after maybe 2-3 years, I started to think, why should I do this? Yeah, and then I started to look for something else. And I can say in 1996, many things changed in my mind and in my way of seeing farming, how to look at farming. And I started at that time alone. I started to do some experiments in our family garden in the beginning, in my parents' garden. And for many years, I was alone until I can say 2002, I succeeded to demonstrate the first successful non-chemical way of farming. But I didn't know that I am doing agroecology until a friend of mine came and when he saw what I'm doing, he was an Italian, Argentinian friend, and he said, you are doing agroecology. I said, what? He said, yes, what are you doing is agroecology. And this happened in 2002. And since then, I started to promote agroecology and started to talk about agroecology. And it took me, I can say, maybe 13, 14 years. And people didn't actually accept this idea in the beginning. But in the last 7-8 years, I can say that things changed differently, dramatically, and many people started to follow agroecological way of farming. And now in Palestine, I can say that we have a strong agroecological movement. 4 or 5 years ago, also we established a group of people who are promoting agroecology, who believe on agroecology. We established what's so-called the Palestinian Agroecological Forum. We are promoting agroecology, and now in these days we are doing a kind of mapping, and we will create a database about all farmers who are doing agroecology. And last year also we all were engaged in producing a film, a documentary called The Untold Revolution. This film is talking about agroecological movement in Palestine, and you can find it on YouTube. It's in Arabic, but with English subtitle. And also I can say that now in Palestine, we have maybe the strongest agroecological movement in the region, in our region. And we became also part of a regional movement. This movement is growing now in the eastern part of the Mediterranean Sea, and also in the southern part of Mediterranean Sea. So in Morocco, Algeria, Tunisia, Egypt now. Just 2 weeks ago, I came back from Egypt, and we were also talking and promoting agroecology. I think now things are changing very fast. Do I still have time?
Just to wrap up, yeah. We want to hear.
Yeah, soon I think we will have an agroecological forum around the Mediterranean. I mean, in the Arabic-speaking countries, because also in Lebanon there is a growing movement, in Iraq now, in Tunisia. So in many countries there are new forms of organizations, and we agreed that we will establish one agroecological forum for the whole region, and to start also organizing some conferences on agroecology in order to inform people about agroecology, because still a lot of people they don't understand what is agroecology.
Well, for us, these quiet bottom-up initiatives that respect diversity, they are truly a quiet revolution. And that's why we call the film Planet Local a quiet revolution. And it's so encouraging to hear what you're saying, Saad. And obviously you're seeing very real growth, very real improvement. This is not just some fantasy. I'm hoping, Salim, I met you and Saad together in Portugal. I'm hoping you also have great news about what's happening. I know Salim has been doing amazing work, getting young people interested in agriculture and changing the narrative about being backward and stupid if you're on the land. And so we're very, very happy to be collaborating with you. Will you tell us what's been happening in your world?
Thank you very much, Helena. I'm very happy to mix my voice with all those grassroots leaders. Very happy to be part of the movement. Yeah, I think it is a good thing to try to shift from global economy to local economy. And I'm from Benin, Republic of Benin, West Africa. I'm a farmer. I'm doing agroecology, and I help young people to do entrepreneurship, let's say, to create their own farms, small-scale farms, led by small-scale farmers. It is very important to notice that, because we are facing the same problems with you, with Saad, with everyone here, about international market and corporations. And it's good to know why I involved in agroecology and entrepreneurship. It's good to know it because it's the same problems everywhere. Just taking the case of my country, we are about 80% in agriculture. But we are in Africa, on the top of countries which are producing cotton. Cotton. It's the top this year in Africa. But it means, paradoxically, that it kills our soils because of chemicals and pesticides, poverty, and we are not fixing the price. It's going outside. We are not fixing the price, and we're outside the people that ask us money currency to pay the chemicals, but they cannot pay our cotton as we want. Just say like this, and you understand what I'm saying. The second one is soybean. We are producing soybean also. But cotton and soybean are all raw materials for outside. How can we do to eat? How can we do to break the chains, the cycle of poverty? It's not possible. That's why my country is also, especially my city, especially the city which sent many young people on the sea, dying on the sea in Mediterranean, immigration. So in that context, I don't talk about everything, but it's just to show you that it's very crucial to change our mind. It's very crucial to change the system. And to do it, I choose to demonstrate, to show that for farming, get rid of cotton. It's difficult with the government, but we have to say that. Get rid of cotton, get rid of soybean. Try to produce our food first. Try to meet or to match our neighbors' needs. We can do it. Our food, see what the neighbors need and match it, and then try to do a network, a local market. From that local market, we can move to see when we have self-sufficiency, when we have food for ourselves, we can see what to sell outside. That's why I think this movement of grassroots, of underground work is very important for us. Every year organized for World Localization Day time, what I name green classes is for young people to know the potential of the nature, young people to learn agroecology, and young people to understand that it's necessary to change our mind, to put ourselves in not international market, but local market, to build local economy, grow our food, grow what can give us opportunity to be self-sufficient, and that's what we are doing. Thank you.
Salim, you really just expressed perfectly what Local Futures is all about. It's very important that we do raise awareness about this globalizing path, which is monoculture for export, specialized for export from the beginning of the modern economy, that this is the enemy, that this is the structural enemy
Absolutely.
of people and landscapes all over the world. And you said it beautifully, that we also need to articulate this, we need to warn of that while telling the stories of what happens when we turn in the opposite direction, exactly opposite. Diversification for home needs first, and trade where it makes sense, but trading partners, not trading via giant corporations that are monopolies.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much. And I'd like to go next to Jay, because Jay has been one of the new economists who's been grounded and interested in agriculture, interested in localization with his REconomy project. And I'm very happy that he's teaching at Schumacher College and also at Plymouth University, and helping to add to the chorus of voices for a need in a dramatic systemic turnaround in the economy.
Well, thanks. And thanks, everybody. This is, well, it's great to be part of this course. It is a course and there are so many voices and more coming. And so it's a bit humbling and inspiring to be listening to everybody's story right now. So I'm in a very privileged place, Totnes in the Southwest. There's so much going on. It has really fertile soil, so to speak, for all kinds of relocalization projects of all kind. I think, yeah, so it punches way above its weight for a small town. You mentioned the REconomy project. This is something we've been doing for about 12 years. We have a co-working space that is a pay-what-you-can space, sort of a proto-commons model. And we've been doing something called the Local Entrepreneur Forum and Community of Dragons for all of this time. And it's been really fantastic as a way to include more people in the practice of relocalizing. Chris mentioned how hard it was to acquire land. So we just had our 11th Local Entrepreneur Forum last week or the week before. And one of the projects is local. They're called Bowden Pillars Future. They're buying, or have bought actually, I think something like 15 hectares. They're going to do a regenerative super eco housing development to support the regenerative farm and the rewilding. Super inspirational. And lots of people in the community are ready to support it. And that's really satisfying. I also work in the next door city, which has a lot of deprivation and inequality. It's a coastal city. So for those of you who are familiar with sort of English decaying seaside towns, it's very challenging. It's a challenging environment. It's not fertile soil. So what we're doing over there is trying to create that fertile soil in all kinds of ways. One of the ways is through very participatory events, but also in trying to forge relationships with other folks who were doing things there, and especially with the council who had adopted a community wealth building model. And then I'm also part of an international network that we call the REconomistas, Community of Practice. And learning has been mentioned many times. I think if we want to accelerate the spread and adoption of some of our ideas and practices, we need to really spread the know-how for doing these kinds of things, and that means learning. So on Monday, we're going to talk about a new initiative that we're going to try out. It's a place-to-place peer learning thing. We're calling it REconomy Twinning Places for the moment, but we're going to see if we can begin to create bigger bandwidth between places, sharing know-how, building relationships, and including interpretation and translation in the mix, because I think that's really important. All of these kinds of meetings happen in English, which thank you and I'm sorry at the same time. So I had a couple of observations that I thought I would share real quick. I do think more people are coming into this movement. That's what I'm experiencing down here in South Devon, escaping corporate life, escaping city life. I think the pandemic gave people a chance to reconsider things. So there's a lot of newbie energy, very emotional. And I think one of our challenges is how do we onboard? And especially because I think in these days, there's social media, which is super fragmented. But also, I think, as Juan alluded to, there's so many brands to choose from. I think there's a lot of fragmentation in our movement. And we love diversity because this is where we innovate, but also I think there's an opportunity for us to learn from each other a lot more and come together a lot more and consider that really we should be ideologically agnostic when it comes to the practicalities of making this kind of change on the ground. So instead of like this approach or that approach, maybe each has its moment, each has its circumstance, and what we need is a big toolbox and some facility with knowing like which tool to use at the right time.
That's 4 minutes, Jay.
Okay, thanks. Yeah, so there's so much more that I could say. Bottom-up organizing, many of us like to have a good attitude and be hopeful. This kind of work is really hard. It's hard. Working with human beings is messy and it's slow. And so this is why I think that the learning is really important, and this idea of conviviality. And I think this might be a way for us to begin to build bridges with other movements and other approaches. There's more I could say about that, but I think I'm running out of time. Education is really important too. And I'm really happy that I met Schumacher, and I think there's an opportunity to build networks, or at least, build networks and relationships among progressive educational programs like this one. Thanks.
Thank you. And I'd like to go next to Jesus, who helped to translate my book, Local is Our Future, into Spanish, and we've been collaborating now for 3 or 4 years. Tell us more about what you've been up to.
Hi, Helena. Hi, Henri. Thank you, everybody. It's so inspiring and hopeful to listen to all of you. Again, let me just share a few pictures on the screen, if you don't mind. So in 2010, 2011, I was lucky enough to be part of the first co-working space. Jay was mentioning this before, in Madrid, in Spain. So I joined the hosting team and realized how important it is to have a physical space for change makers to come together. Whereas before they were working, isolated in their little corners in the city. When you come together, just synergies multiply, and we can scale up impact together and change the minds or hearts of a lot of people. Just a physical space where things happen, right? So I told myself, one day I'm going to do this in my hometown. It's in my small little town in central rural Spain, around the Duero, in the winemaking region of Ribera del Duero. And so 13 years later, after traveling the world and so on, I came back home and told myself, hey, I've got a few resources for my family that I can leverage to actually build, a place for change makers to come together and change the city, change the entire region. So, and this is where I can have the most impact, because I know the people, I have access to the land, and so I can make a small impact in my small little world, and hope that other people like you do the same in other parts of the world. The small revolution, right? So here we're starting a co-housing project. We have already running a co-working space and an incubator for new social businesses. And in the same block, my brother is running an ecological winery. So we closing the loop a little bit back to farming and food, right? And it's right next to the city center and close to a riverside park. So a year ago, it was just a dream. This was the place before, right? A mess. But I thought, hey, this can be a great place. And a year later, here we are. We just hosted 15 female entrepreneurs from all over Europe. They came here to develop their own businesses through mentorship and different incubation programs, but also they mingled with local entrepreneurs to create synergies and exchange best practices and so on. And we just had so much fun, with food, music, and local culture. So it's a celebration of locality, as you call it. So we want to run social innovation events, but also culture, food, celebrating the local food, the local traditions, and also educate small children as well on new ways of social entrepreneurship and social innovation. So I started the project alone, but thanks to the journey so far, I've been able to come together with 4 other change makers locally, and now we're friends, and we are joining forces to scale up the project. And so our next phase is these 2 warehouses here across the plot where the co-housing is going to take place one day. And now we're going to turn these warehouses, which are now garages, into an events venue with a bar, because people here love the food and the wine, and a stage for cultural performing arts. So this is how it looks like at the moment. But once again, it's only a dream at the moment, but hopefully in a few months, it will look like something like this. This is an inspirational place in Madrid, Nave Maria. Or like this. This is where I started my journey in the first co-working space in Madrid, right? So this is a place for events, but there's also a cafeteria and also meeting rooms and also co-working spaces. So everything happened all together at once, like the movie. And in terms of localization movement in Spain, I think my colleague Juan Del Rio already mentioned, there's a back to the rural movement going on, still small, still the beginning. There's many co-working and co-living spaces opening up in rural places. There's energy cooperatives, energy communities, agroecological cooperatives like the ones in Palestine. Also some intersectional, intergenerational placemaking going on in rural communities, and even new grassroots political parties springing up. Of course, there are a lot of challenges moving forward. There's what's called neo-rural colonialism, like big corporations taking over the land of rural communities for their big solar installation panels. Of course, the youth are migrating into the cities because there's few jobs in rural communities. And in these communities, public infrastructure and public services have been eroded and even disappearing. urbanization still massive in Spain,
That's
industrial
4 minutes.
agribusinesses. All right, I'll wrap up. And of course, national politics always gets in the way, but systemic change is around the corner, I believe. And we coming together through networks and federations of small people in small places, like Juan was saying. And now Spain is receiving a lot of EU funding for recovery purposes. And if we spend it correctly and be able to derive it to the people on the ground instead of multinationals as intermediaries, I think change will happen sooner rather than later. And I'm so inspired and grateful today. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'm leaving the last word to MJ. And you're the only person here that I don't know, but I know that you've met with Henry before in Ladakh, and very interested to hear what you have to say.
Thank you very much, Helena. Hi, everyone. An honor to be part of this conversation tonight, and this being a localization event, let me situate myself with my local coordinates and joining you this evening from South Wales, or what the Welsh would call Cymru, where I am a relatively new arrivant, and through my various movements and displacements around the world, I've had many home places. Helena mentioned the high Himalaya, also the ancient forests of Salmon Nation on the west coast of Turtle Island, and the fertile valleys has been a theme in this conversation. The fertile valleys of the Macedonian Southeast and the Balkans. I also have political homes in various movements and movement building. One of them is I've had my defining moments as an adult in organizing in solidarity with Coast Salish folks who are defending the old growth forest on so-called Vancouver Island, but mostly belonging to a movement to reimagine education, the United World Colleges movement in its 60th year. And I spent the last decade living on campuses with students from 90 different countries, really living into this idea of diversity as a source of strength. And I say all of this to situate myself, but also to acknowledge and give gratitude that if I have something to share today of value, it is to the credit of the places and the people who have shared those lessons with me. Speaking, I guess, to this audience tonight, I don't have to necessarily explain or convince anyone of the parallels between kind of globalized extractive capitalist economic system on one hand and the international global elite liberal education system on the other hand. And maybe parallel is actually a really mild word to put it. There's dynamics of co-production between these two systems, and that's the world that I come from. Education, where we really see that the economic system will really require a certain kind of student and servant of its needs, and will put in place these incentives and rewards. And on the flip side, the education system will reproduce the economy by delivering a certain kind of person. And we hear this in the narratives of future fit knowledge and skills and workplace readiness. And when I say I work in education, I guess my work has been to challenge and destabilize and transform this relationship between these two systems. And in this is a kind of reckoning, but also at the same time opportunity, because if this dynamic of co-production holds, then that means that interventions that we can have in the education space can also serve as levers to shift and move things in terms of the way that we live on this planet that we've been entrusted with. So maybe the most material manifestation of this work for me is the work we're trialing here at Atlantic College next year. We've designed a course that we've called the Systems Transformation for Just Futures in Food, in Energy, in Biodiversity and Migration, all themes that have been touched on in the course of this conversation, where we get young people to collaborate intergenerationally across disciplines, across differences, geographies, and power differentials to advance transformative systems change. And we were challenged to share some trends that we observe, and I want to share two briefly that we see in our work. And the first trend that I see is that as educators, we're being a lot more honest with our young people that the system is not broken and it does not need fixing. In fact, the economic system is working pretty much exactly like it was intended. And it has these logics of growth and wealth and power concentrations that are baked into it in a way that means that the violences, inequities, and injustices that result from it are not in any way random, but they are really by design, and we heard about some of them tonight already. This is not a new idea, but I guess it just becomes that much more obvious when you look at it in a real context, For example, when you live in a ecological sacrifice zone, you realize it's not an anomaly of capitalism that this is happening, and it's a sign that something's not working. In fact, it's very much necessary and required for the logics of that system. And why I think this is a positive trend is because I guess it allows us to liberate ourselves from two banal narratives. The first one of kind of incrementalist solutionism, this idea that we can fix the system or save the system or smart our way out of the meta crisis, that we can kind of perform some minor repair work and make it all good. And instead, kind of reckoning with this means starting from a principle of harm by design reorients us towards more radical transformative work at the root cause level, at the ontological level, at the spiritual level, if you will. And like Salim was saying earlier, at the level of mental models. And the, I guess the other... Yeah, okay, let me wrap up and I'll save the rest for the open discussion, because the second trend that I really see is that we're giving a lot more energy and attention to showing that alternatives can work by showing alternatives that are working. And this is kind of what Juan was speaking to earlier. And I'm thinking about when I was the age of my students in my late teens and early 20s, most of my work was organizing against, it was resistance work. And I don't think the fact that in the last decade I've done more generative work is just generational, but I think in our movements in general, we're spending more time building the world that we actually want to live in, rather than just averting the future that we'd rather not live in or that we want to avoid. And so I guess we are navigating all of the complexities of living between those two worlds, the one that's dying and the one that's being birthed. But every time I talk about complexity and messiness, and this is the last thing that I'll say, I think for me, there's also a grounding in like absolute moral clarity that if in this moment, whoever you are in the world, if you are not throwing your full weight behind movements that are centering and defending life and lifting up life-affirming practices, then what are you doing, and how do you explain what you're doing? And I'll pause there and back over to you, Helena.
Well, thank you so much. Again, very, very clearly stating what we are trying to say, which is that we have precisely these two paths in front of us. One of them is life destroying. The other one is life affirming and life connecting. We have to be connected. We have to respect experiential knowledge. We have to be closer to the life, whether it's human or non-human, that we affect in meeting our needs from this planet. When we go shopping in the Walmarts of the world, we have no idea whether people on the other side of the world are being trampled on, how much is being poisoned, how many forests are being clear-cut. And the CEOs have even less understanding of it because they are totally caught in a world of numbers. And so from my point of view, the over-specialization, and that's where there is that link between those two systems, as you were saying. For me, it's one system that created a knowledge path to support it. So this type of education, this type of knowledge creation was created as part of the centralizing of economic power. And I think at the end you were saying we were resisting in the past and now we're creating the world we want. But I know you also said, even today, we need to articulate and voice our opposition to that life-destroying path, while at the same time doing everything we can to become part of and to voice our support for the life-affirming one. And now I think more than anything, that once we link the way that the majority of human beings on this planet are becoming poorer, just in pursuit of basic needs, food on the table, roof over their head, people are having to work harder and longer to meet those needs. We need to be addressing that side by side with the destruction of ecosystems, the energy-intensive technological replacement of people, step by step. So the ecological destruction, the social destruction, rising poverty, rising emissions, connected to the same system. And fundamentally, It's been about monoculture for export and importing what you need. And we have to recognize that it's also been the import and export of money. We're allowing the creation of money outside of national control, outside of national boundaries, and probably an issue that I shouldn't go into too much, but I do think that once you have real clarity about the fact that this dominant system, which most governments are actively still supporting, is taking us in the opposite direction of what we all either consciously or unconsciously want. And that's the reconnection to life, being part of community and connected to life. So now I think we want to start right away now with Q&A, Henry, don't you think? Have you seen some questions we should address?
I do think, yeah. There are some questions put in the chat from another Nicole. How can someone be a part of this movement but still have an income with rising cost of living? I used to work on a small local organic farm in my community, but the pay wasn't enough to cover cost of living. I want to support the movement, but it's basically a struggle. Recent graduate with student debt and minimal savings. Does anyone have perspective on that?
I certainly do, if others don't. And that is that I would urge you to think of possibly staying in a job that will provide enough to meet your basic needs, but commit to joining this, the best word we can think of is localization movement, because we would urge you to connect to like-minded people locally, ideally people you can meet with on a regular basis, to together explore what you might be able to do jointly. Now, it could be that you'll just together as a group share the work of volunteering on a farm. You might actually find that in doing that, you'll be able to get delicious organic food for a lower price, but you might also actually enjoy the activity.
So I would also ask for the other presenters, if you'd like to respond or to add something, either raise your real hand or raise your fake hand by pressing the raise hand button on Zoom. There's Ty says raise her fake hand. And then Nelson. We'll go Tyson, Nelson.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Helena, for that. And I completely agree. I think when we join ourselves in community, there is the strength. And I think this is the next step that we need to do, right? So connect, networking, because corporations and other areas of capitalism, they're super intertwined, and have their strategy, and they're working very smartly to maintain the system as it is. So we need to be much more smarter than they are and come together and understand that it's not about being one big corporation, but being local movements as the smallest it can be, but by being together in a global community. So another thing that I have been seeing in Brazil, so I don't know where you are from, Nicole, but in Brazil, we're seeing lots of impact investments happening. So we see that people with with money in the system are looking into invest into small local initiatives, especially in areas which are in degradation, for example, the Amazon or Pantanal or Cerrado. So we have been working with investors to create like this mental model shift into more philanthropic investing, so that these initiatives have money to start a little bit of growth, not into becoming big corporations, but a little bit of growth, so they can walk with their own legs. We say it in Brazil, so like they can have a little push in the start and being able to sustain themselves financially as well. So I don't know in the region that you are, but maybe looking for the new finance movements could help out into bringing money into the project itself. So, well, I truly believe it's not an easy movement, but we are transitioning. So if you're not able to work with the thing that you believe, at least you can participate, as Elena said, and use your time, your care, your effort, share it with your family, because we understand that we are in this big change era. And as Marija said, we are in between this world that's dying and this world that's birthing. So don't also put yourself down for not having everything right now, but do it like the best that you can. And I think we're all doing that.
I think Nelson wanted to say something. Thanks, Thais.
All right, thank you very much. I think here we are dealing with living things. Living things, they are actually looking at us right now as we are speaking. The local economies are actually built by living things that were created by God and for a reason. And they are all in our context. And they are surviving. And as they are surviving, we are there now to support them, to make sure that they give us the best efforts. And how to bring that together is what matters in as far as movement building is concerned, and how to connect to others, those that might be interested, and how do we start that process, and how do we start that journey of connecting. It has to start from a family farm. Like our experience within Via Campesina, we looking from the family farm, and we're wanting now to look at how farmers now connect through farmer to farmer learning and exchanges, and where they have to expose the evidence that has to be seen by any single farmer, that there is something that is living that I can take on board. And how do you build that movement from that factor of X, showing evidence, to making some kind of support that will bring other stakeholders on board, because you cannot fight this struggle alone, but it needs a lot of other stakeholders that they have to come on board and then support the process. And that is to be a journey that you have to navigate in a very smooth and very much logic and understanding way.
Thank you, Nathan. Anyone else want to comment? And Henry, any other questions?
We have a few comments. There was one that was related. One was in the chat. There was a bit of a conversation about CEOs and how conscious are the people perpetuating this system. And there were some who were saying they know exactly what they're doing, and some who were saying they think the blindness is greater up top than anywhere.
I think, I think these, when conversations veer into this category, it's interesting and necessary, but it isn't doing the work on the ground, which, as I said before, is really difficult. And one of the reasons it's really difficult is because you have to have conversations with other people, and other people who are not like you, and other people who are not going to understand your language. They're not going to understand the analysis. And so where's the common ground? And it's hard to find sometimes. And so I think this is part and parcel of the work of trying to transform a place where you're working with people who've been living there for generations, all kinds of memories and meanings. But having said that, I think one of the things that is common ground for a lot of people, and maybe even some CEOs, is that they do actually love their place. They love where they live. They love their community, and they love various aspects about it. They may not understand all of the larger forces at work that are threatening their place, but very often you can find the common ground by talking about things that you can do on the ground to make somebody's life better. And one of those things, I think, is entrepreneurship. And so I'm very pleased that so many of us here on this call are interested in entrepreneurship of the kind that we need now in these times. That's a whole other conversation about what that is necessarily. But But we need more local entrepreneurs, more entrepreneurs who put front and center the primacy of life and creating the conditions for life, and creating the conditions for us to be able to meet our needs in the context of all the other living things going about their business, trying to meet their needs. And this is why I brought up this word only briefly a minute ago, conviviality, because I think this is one of the really important things that we can work on across ideological boundaries. And I think it might be one of those things too that could help us bring movements together. The degrowth folks, after all, have been talking about conviviality as an approach to degrow our consumption, degrow our impacts. So this is the area that I'm kind of excited about.
Awesome. There's a question someone has raised their hand and would like to ask a question live, I believe. John Wynn, can we get you to ask a question?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes.
Yeah, it's not a question as such, it's an observation. We're in Oxfordshire, and following on from what Helena was talking about Nestle corporations appropriating the regen movement, etc. We've got a not dissimilar issue in Oxfordshire with a very large palace called Blenheim Palace, and they're pretty much trying to appropriate the decarbonisation agenda by proposing the largest solar park in Europe on the doorstep of 50,000 people. Now, the issue there is their response to it is that we're so concerned about the environment that we are proposing this, but it doesn't include any local involvement whatsoever. So in response to that, we've turned around and we've just created a bioregion, is what we're calling it, and bringing together 28 different communities, villages, to seek a narrative in order to generate a pushback against what otherwise is a corporate proposal. And I have to say, it's quite incredible, the narrative existing with the likes of Blenheim Palace. It doesn't dominate by merit, it simply dominates by lack of an alternative narrative that we don't have. And that's why we're pulling a bioregion together in order to identify how many more people can come together. And I have to say, Helena, that's why this is such a great program you're throwing out, because this aligns exactly with what we're doing. I wonder if you have any comment on that.
Absolutely. I hope you will come to Bristol if you can. I hope you'll also listen to our colleague Camila Moreno, who's been at all the climate summits for the last 11 years. We have been warning about the carbon narrative. We have seen, and Camila has been there in person, to see that the entire framing has been set by global businesses that are preventing an honest discussion of climate change. So first of all, the emissions from trade are not even mentioned. This means that as food is exported from America, beef exported, beef imported, England exports as much milk and butter as it imports, as fish is flown to China to be deboned. These emissions are not even mentioned. So we have a climate narrative that from the outset has been set by corporations. Carbon was a very elegant, a very easy way to reduce this complex issue into this essentially tradable commodity so that giant businesses could make money while scaring the world to death. It's so evil, it's so horrible, and yet, you know, I've met Al Gore, I've met some of the people who are still caught in this. I've met many activists who still, you know, we're not getting the big picture. And this is why it's so important that we do have an international discussion, and particularly to have allies like Camila Moreno, who has been at these negotiations, has seen with her own eyes. The carbon story, which does not even allow not only a discussion of emissions from trade, but a discussion of fossil fuels. we need to throw it out the window. We need to be looking at a Green New Deal, which is trying to plaster the world with solar panels, bung up windmills where there's no wind. There is an honest story there, which very much relates to the global to local, but it's getting very late, and I don't want to bring everyone into the story right now, but we would love you to look more at our materials and hope that you will find a narrative that can be helpful. And we also would so urge you not to demonize the other side, not to demonize individuals. Try to approach it from a compassionate, calm, just trying to get the bigger picture out there, and do realize there's a lot of blindness at many levels. And of course, we don't have the full truth of everything, but there are some very specific, very real truths in this that would be obvious to most people. Of course, we must talk about the emissions from global trade when we talk about climate change. And of course, that would be the easiest way of systemically reducing emissions, by simply keeping our own food at home and other countries doing the same. Massive reductions could be achieved that way. Maybe just telling that story could help to shift the debate a bit. Thank you very much for that comment. So we are just so honored and so grateful to all of you who've joined us tonight, all of you whose names we don't know, but also our colleagues from around the world. Many of you will be joining us in Bristol, and I hope that all of you who are listening know about our attempt to try to bring this discussion live, face-to-face in Bristol. It's a major undertaking for us, huge expenses, huge stress. We have about 80 speakers coming together in Bristol, working with the former mayor, George Ferguson, who's become a localist, who's been speaking at our Economics of Happiness conferences in Japan, Korea, the US. And we will be streaming all the plenaries. We will be having, the week before our summit, there will be events throughout the town. And our summit is the 29th and 30th of September and the 1st of October. And I hope that, as many of you as possible can join us either online or live. We are amazed that there are people buying tickets to come from Brazil, from Iceland, from around the world. There's a lot of excitement. The world is ready to hear this systemic, broad, holistic perspective. If you don't know, Financial Times has done 3 documentaries about the need to shift from global to local. But guess what? They are framing it in a corporate way, so their local is including high-rise indoor agriculture run by AI. We urgently need to sharpen our view, to be clear about what do we want. Do we really care about justice? Do we want to reduce the gap between rich and poor? Do we want to have some semblance of democracy? Do we want to respect Mother Gaia with all her diversity? Do we believe in the community fabric being re-enlivened and strengthened through deep connection by creating human scale interdependence? This is what this is about, and I think the bottom-up community-based movement is getting clearer and clearer, and there are more and more examples. I cannot believe how many beautiful examples demonstrate remarkable perseverance, remarkable goodwill, real deep love for nature, for humanity. Human beings are demonstrating this. Don't fall for the narrative that says, oh, we're greedy and aggressive by nature, it's all hopeless, nobody cares. People care, and they're working hard, and they're creating beautiful examples. Thank you all so much. Thanks to young Henry for getting up at 5:30 this morning to join us. Thank you, Henry.
No worries. Thanks, Helena. Pleasure to be here. Thank you, everyone, so much.
Yeah.
Attendees and panelists. It's been a fantastic conversation, and we will make recordings available, as well as there's been a lot of requests to make the chat available afterwards. So I'll try and figure out some way to do that as well. I'll email those recordings out to all of you. When they're done, give me about a week.
All right.
Thank-
Bye-bye. Thank you.
Thank
Bye,
you.
bye to everyone.
Thanks,
Bye.
everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.